pro-thrift era. I mean, there were banks, local community banks, that actually encouraged kids to open passbook savings accounts and to put their babysitting money or their lawn mowing money in those accounts. Now I think a lot of banks don't want that business. Stores had labeling plans. They're kind of coming back, where you paid on an item and took it home only when you paid the full amount. And my elementary school had a school bank where we sold U.S. savings bonds. So the kids would come in and buy a stamp for, I think it was 25 cents, paste it in a little book. And the point of all of this was that it sort of imprinted on our consciousness and on our habits this sense that our small dollars could add up, that they counted for something, that they mattered. And even, you know, the pennies that we made reflected a kind of something that we could be proud of, that reflected earned money, effort, and so forth. So, to make a long story short, my moment of emotional truth came to me when I returned to visit my mother-in-law, and the main shopping drag where I used to ride my bike and do errands for my mom was just full of payday lenders, check cashing outfits, auto title places, and lottery outlets. So it was like, you know, if you know the movie It's a Wonderful Life, it was like this dystopic vision of what had happened in my community that I cared about so much. And I did go to the library to see, when did this happen? And I discovered that by looking through the city directory that all of these, especially the payday lenders and the lottery, had arrived very recently. The payday lenders in the 90s just swept, and in Wisconsin they're completely unregulated. So that's my personal Odyssey story. And I actually made good use of it when I came to write the draft for this publication, because I had two main conclusions based on both research and, you know, this moment of emotional truth. And my first conclusion was that the nation had shifted from a thrift culture to a debt culture, and from a culture of sustainability and growth to a culture of unsustainability over the long haul. In a thrift culture, just to let you know what I mean by that, we had pro-thrift institutions that were dedicated to helping middle and low-income Americans save. In a debt culture, we have anti-thrift institutions dedicated to trapping people into debt. And the more people that get over their heads in debt, the more susceptible they become to the false come-ons and the fake promises of state-sponsored predatory gambling. So, you know, it just makes a perfect environment for the entrenchment of predatory gambling, to have a transformation into the debt culture that we've made for ourselves and these institutions have made for us. But the other part of this debt culture is that it's not merely financial. It also represents a kind of values shift. I mean, people used to be afraid of spending money they didn't have. You know, and then when they did get into debt, it was a bit of a burden. You know, people wanted to get out of it. And even during the Great Depression, when people lost everything, their homes, their farms, their livelihoods, they still felt an obligation to not be in debt, to repay the debt when good times returned. But as these anti-thrift institutions took hold, more and more Americans took on debt, and they lost their fear of being over-indebted. It wasn't scary anymore to get a mortgage for, you know, more money than you could possibly afford, or to look at huge unpaid balances on your credit card statement. A lot of this was driven by public policy. And being over your heads in debt had now become the new normal, the American way of life. And so that's why I call it a culture, because culture does have to do with our way of life. So that was my first conclusion. My second conclusion was that these anti-thrift institutions had actually created what I called a lottery class. They had systematically targeted lower income Americans who, under favorable circumstances, used to be and still could be regular savers. Their small dollars counted for something. They, you know, meant something. and instead turned these potential savers into a class of habitual debtors and bettors. And if I had to nominate the single institution that's been at the center of the debt culture, it's state-sponsored gambling. And that's because it comes directly from our government, and really indirectly, in a sense, from the consent of the governed, even though, you know, a lot of people who, like me, sort of the lottery and other forms of state-sponsored gambling have been invisible to them. So, you know, my maybe naive idea of what our government should do is to help build opportunities for everyone, but particularly those who are striving to get into the middle class and realize the American dream. And instead, our state governments have teamed up with the gambling industry to promote mega buck wins. And they've told citizens that success comes from blind luck and random chance rather than from effort and having the government on their side. So this is, you know, this is the end of chapter 1 of my 2-chapter presentation. Now I want to turn to just some more practical, pragmatic thinking that the Institute for American Values has done about how we can help advance this effort to stop predatory gambling. And first, I guess I'd say that I think that social change really comes from people like you, people who are committed to a cause, who dig in and do the hard, gritty work in their own states and localities of changing things for the better. And that means, you know, working on things that, you know, aren't very glamorous, speaking to legislators, appearing before lottery commissions, making the case to your friends and neighbors, getting your local community organizations to sign on. But another part of the hard work, I think, involves defining a new reality. And by that I mean getting the public to reject the opposition's definition of reality and to get the public to buy into a better and more truthful reality. And for the purposes of stopping predatory gambling, at least it seems to me that it means using the power you have not only to influence the political process, but also to define reality in ways that sustain truth and justice and fairness and freedom. So here's my 3-part think tank strategy. Here's what I'm proposing to my colleagues that we can do to help create and define a better reality. The first, and this was touched on brilliantly and beautifully in the morning sessions, is to do the research analysis that can be used at the grassroots. As again was brought out earlier, there's a dearth of independent, credible, persuasive research on the harmful effects or just the general social impact of predatory state-sponsoring gambling. With a few notable exceptions, and I think they're all in the room today, the gambling industry has enjoyed a virtual monopoly on what the public knows about its products. And like big tobacco, again, John Kent mentioned this, like big tobacco, big gambling buys up research talent, and then it uses that research to make false claims, hide evidence of harm, and promote its unhealthy products. And actually, I think that Texas does a better job than most states I've looked at in reporting on some of the demographic information on the lottery and other forms of state-sponsored gambling. Most of the Lottery Commission reports that you find online or even request are marketing documents. They do not give you the full evidence of, you know, the good, bad, and the ugly. They're marketing, they're selling their products to the public and calling it a report from the state commission. Now, it's true that think tanks don't have the deep pockets that big gambling has, but they do have the talent and I think the intellectual tools